Thomas and Serge, thank you for joining us today. Thomas, you have been searching for a property to rent for around half a year. You finally found a place this month. Can you tell us about the trials and tribulations that made this search so difficult and so long?
Absolutely. So, finding a space, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge the pandemic. It's always crazy trying to find something when lots and lots of leasing agents don't want to show in person because of the condition. And I'm very sympathetic to that. You know, safety is incredibly important, but trying to move into a space sight unseen is kind of terrifying, especially with the expectation. A lot of spaces that we were even considering were like, well, you need to have a leasing agreement in place before we even let you see it. And then if you don't like it, then we can talk about canceling the leasing agreement. And that just didn't really sit right with me. That wasn't something that I wanted to do. And I thought that'd be a one-off, but I toured 16 different places and I threw out about 30 just because their expectation was I'd have to have something in place with them, either an approval or a leasing agreement before they'd even let me see it.
Wait, it's a binding leasing agreement?
Yes, like it's a binding leasing agreement. They were like, we'd let you cancel the lease if you didn't like it, but they sent over an entire copy of the lease, expecting the binding agreement to be signed before you even
saw it.
Yes.
Wow.
Which absolutely sat wrong with me. And it wasn't like independent leasing agents. These were large rental companies that were doing this. It was kind of terrifying.
And what about application fees?
Okay, well, we saw a lot of that. The application fees, they weren't unreasonable. They hovered between $45 and $75, with most of them hovering at right about $50. That's what they claimed it cost to run the background check and do all that kind of stuff. That seemed pretty standard. The space I'm in now, it was a $50 application fee.
Did you have to pay a lot of those?
Yeah, I ended up paying about 12 or 13 application fees. All of them accepted me, but that was just the process to get in the door to see the space.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That can really add up. So where did you stay till you found a spot?
I'm very fortunate. So my partner and I both have family in town. I stayed with extended family, an aunt, and then very briefly my grandfather while he needed help. And then my partner was staying with his parents, but if we didn't have that, it would have been absolutely terrifying trying to find a spot with nowhere to stay. I mean, we started looking in earnest maybe August or September of last year. And we'd been toying with the idea since March or April of last year. So we were doing online stuff, but, you know, Feet to Pavement started in August and it took until this month to be somewhere.
The New York Times recently reported that Albuquerque is seeing one of the highest surges in rental price increases during the pandemic in the nation. That's around 8%. Serge, why do you think we are seeing this increase right now?
Well, I mean, there's less housing and more demand, right? The math is pretty straightforward. We have in Albuquerque seen, housing availability go down, housing affordability go down as well, and the number of folks who are trying to get into the places that do become available are, it's just growing. There's certainly the market is a lot less fluid right now. People aren't moving, and especially when it comes to buying homes, those things homes on the market get snatched up very quickly right now, and some of that is pandemic related, but some of it is also systemic stuff about supply of housing and the demand for it. And what Thomas has talked about is perhaps, like I said, it's maybe situational to some extent in terms of what we're seeing nationwide about housing elasticity and availability in the market right now. But the difficulty of finding a place to live is, especially for folks who are trying to find someplace affordable in Albuquerque, has been going on for quite some time. There's just not enough housing that's able to meet the needs or the resources of the folks who need it.
Is there a disconnect between housing costs and salaries, and that's also a dynamic?
I mean,
here?
Absolutely. That's housing affordability comes two ways, right? The cost of the housing and the resources and the income of the people who are paying it. And Albuquerque, like almost every other place in the country, you cannot afford a 2-bedroom place if you're working 40 hours at minimum wage. And That's not atypical. That's not unusual. Like I said, I think there's no state or county around the country. There are probably discrete municipalities where you can. But in the state of New Mexico, Albuquerque's not unique. We have housing prices have outstripped minimum wage. And so folks who are down at that end of the market are they're priced out. They can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment unless you work multiple jobs or have multiple people working or double up or do something along those lines.
I mean, we've seen this in places, many cities, with an influx of, we all want more jobs here, well-paying jobs, things like Netflix, Amazon's building a warehouse. Do we have any indication if there's an influx of that and if it's driving some of these dynamics?
I mean, any influx like that, and for builders as well and developers, the economics point towards the higher end of the market. It doesn't make economic sense to build affordable housing without deep subsidies, significant subsidies, or other ways to make sure folks can afford it. Starter homes, right? We've seen fewer and fewer of the starter home market homes being built here in Albuquerque because it just makes more, there's more money in building bigger houses. So what that does is there's more housing available for the people who have the means to do it, but for everyone else, the supply is decreasing and demand is increasing, and you see what happens. The math is not hard.
We're also in the middle of a pandemic that's financially devastating. How does this increase or complicate, how does this increase the complication of living situations for everyone involved?
Well, I mean, when you have reduced incomes, that makes it hard for folks to continue to pay rent or to meet, if they want to move into a new place, to be able to show that they meet any income guidelines. You have the reduced amount of money going into the system, disincentivizes landlords from putting places on the market if they're not going to be able to get folks paying the rent. It's an ecosystem, and without the influx of money that comes in, everybody suffers. If we don't prioritize housing as something that we want to make sure that we make it accessible to everybody.
Have you heard stories like Thomas's? Is this, you're hoping this is extremely unique, but it sounds like some of the things he's encountering are systemic.
No, I mean, definitely, in my experience is more with the lower end of the rental market, folks who are desperate to find affordable housing. And the fact is, in Albuquerque, it is a real challenge to find affordable housing because the inventory is not there, and more and more people are being pushed into a worse economic situation. There's more competition for affordability, and there's never a one-to-one match. There are lots of people who are in affordable housing that could afford more, but for whatever reasons are not. So there's sometimes a mismatch between supply and demand that comes from that way. But the city is working to increase affordable housing and whatnot in terms of hundreds of units, whereas the numbers of families who are looking for affordable housing are in the last number I saw was about 18,000, and that was from a couple of years ago, right?
Wow.
So the story that Thomas tells is one that, there's lots of folks who just cannot find a place that meets their needs that they can do, and so they end up living in places that are lower quality, that are they're doubled up, they're crowded, or accepting whatever they can get from a landlord who knows that they have the power to do that.
It sounds like they're kind of taking advantage of that. This upward trend, this upward trend doesn't just pertain to rental price, the surge. As you mentioned, the Albuquerque's housing market is seeing similar jumps. Of course, we have very low mortgage interest rates right now. Yeah. What does this mean for the future of the market, or for younger or lower income people? I mean, I'm assuming Thomas would eventually like to be a homeowner someday.
We actually looked at home ownership. My partner and I have pretty substantial savings that we've accrued. We were looking at, in this situation, being homeowners as opposed to renters, because we both intend to be here for a long time. And it just wasn't feasible. There were no starter homes really that fit our needs. I mean, granted, we had some kind of funny demands. We wanted to be in decent areas of town, but approaching $165 to $200 a square foot in this city is ridiculous. We wanted to be homeowners. It wasn't feasible at this time.
Mm. What does that mean for Albuquerque, Serge?
Well, I mean, it's I don't think it's good, right? If you can only buy a home if you're at the high end of the market and there's no affordable housing for rental and other folks who are down in that end of the market, what we're going to see is probably a less extreme version of what you see in other places where people just get pushed out, where there's no ability for younger people especially to be able to become homeowners, or for folks who have historically, usually that's people of color, communities of color, aren't able to have that wealth that they've already got, can't buy a home, which is historically a source of wealth generation for American families. And you'll see the market, continue to spread, the haves and the have-nots. And down at the lower end, that's also a problem because of the availability. And prioritizing this is really important, right? As I've said many times, housing is a human right, and there's a straight line between commodification of it and a decrease in housing stability. By treating it as something that we are going to put resources into and make sure everyone has the accessibility, that's how we address this problem, not by hoping the market will solve this. It is not, it will not, it cannot.
So Thomas, as we wrap up, we've been hearing what a headache this process was for you to go through. Any advice for someone trying to navigate the market in Albuquerque?
Oh, goodness. I don't necessarily know if my advice is any good, but do lots and lots and lots of research. There are online portals that work pretty well. I got a lot more success in phone calls, actually. I know a lot of young people are scared to pick up the phone and call. I don't know what it is. I know I get dread when I see the phone ring, but calling was very helpful. And look at places that don't necessarily say they have availability. Like where I am right now, a unit just became available and we swooped right in. It was very much a timing thing. Had we not acted very quickly, we wouldn't be here. So be willing to circle back. If you like something, keep contacting and see if they have availability, see if they've got timelines. That's the best I can say. And hope that you find somebody honest. I mean, that's very important in this process. Hope that you find somebody honest.
I want to thank you both for talking with us. These are really important issues to keep a sustainable, viable community. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Megan.